All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first She Breaks the Law, She Develops webinar hosted by She Breaks the Law and the Legal Executive Institute's Transforming Women's Leadership in the Law Initiative. My name is Natalie Runyon, and I have the pleasure of being the co-program manager for digital content for Transforming Women's Leadership. And we are really excited to be launching this webinar today for the She Develops series with She Breaks the Law. So a couple of housekeeping items. You will be able to submit questions, so you should do that in the Q&A panel. So please be mindful of that. During this webinar, you will be on mute, and you will be able to see the speakers, but we will not be able to see you. So just please know that if you are from home and you're still in your pajamas, that's completely okay. And then finally, please know that we will be recording this. So just be mindful of that in the Q&A and what questions you want to ask. So now I'm going to turn it over to Priya, one of the co-founders for She Breaks the Law, to introduce the series and introduce our speaker. Priya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Right, lawbreakers from across the globe. Hello and very warm welcome to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, and indeed good evening, depending on where you've logged on today and dialed out for this very first She Develops event. We are super excited, as Natalie said, to be partnering with Thomson Reuters and the Transforming Women's Leadership in Law program to bring to you 2 webinars under the She Develops strand for She Breaks the Law. The first one is Strategic Relationship Building, which is the topic for today, and the art of asking questions to influence, which will be covered next month. To be honest, as most of you probably know me, if not, I'm Priya Lele, one of the co-founders of She Breaks the Law and Legal Ops Client Solutions Lead at HSF. When Nikki, Christy, and I started and created She Breaks the Law, nearly a year ago, one of our main aims was to support women leaders to develop their strategic networks. Obviously, that's at the very sort of heart and core of our purpose. We know that the power of sort of supportive network is very, very strong, and we're already delighted to see how this community is evolving and supporting each other and lifting one another up. In today's webinar, Sheila Murphy will be talking us through further steps to strengthen our individual networks for career advancement and influencing change. We are very honored and delighted to have Sheila with us today. Sheila is a former Associate General Counsel of MetLife. She's our host for today. After spending 20 years of litigating and developing and coaching talent in corporate America and law firms, Sheila is now pursuing her passion of helping others to reach their full potential full-time. Sheila is the CEO and President of Focus Forward Consulting LLC and Chief Learning and Talent Officer of Women LLC. Thank you, Sheila, for joining us today. And finally, before I hand over to Sheila to share her brilliant insights into today's topic of strategic relationship building, I'd also like to thank those of you that shared your thoughts and questions in advance, which really helped Sheila to tailor her content for today. And of course, thank you to all of you for taking this time to join us today. So thank you very much, and over to you, Sheila.
Great. Thank you. Well, I am thrilled to be here today to hopefully inspire and build confidence in you all with regard to networking and using your strategic relationships. Those were some of the key words that I saw come across the poll that Natalie sent around. And it's really important for you to understand that networking isn't this scary thing that people think it is, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. Our agenda today is going to focus on just building and maintaining a strong network, and then how to leverage your network to create strong relationships that can pivot your career forward. We want to focus on those relationships that will bring back on the investment of your time, because most of us don't have a lot of that. We're going to focus on mentors, sponsors, personal boards of directors, and coaches. And then most importantly, we're going to spend some time going through the scenarios that people submitted to sort of show how this plays out in real life and how you can apply this going forward. Natalie, can you? Thank you. So why network? I think most of you on this call are very experienced women who understand the value of networking, but I want to focus on one thing. It is the #1 indicator of success, no matter what profession you are in. It does not matter. And this is important to know because sometimes people think, oh, if I switched to in-house or I went into operations or I did something different, it's not going to be a factor in my career success. It really is something that you need to figure out how you can do it in a way that is authentic and real and comfortable for you, also getting outside that comfort zone a little bit. Okay, so the other reasons why networking is important, it's a way to build the strategic relationships that will propel your career forward, help you with job placements, as well as expose you to a brilliant amount of ideas. What you're doing really even here today is networking. You are getting together with some people, you may be asking questions. Really, networking is almost every human interaction that you engage in. Next slide, Natalie. So as I was saying, it's every human interaction. A lot of us have this horrible feeling that networking is this horrible, icky process that we have to go to, and that it's this event, a cocktail party where you have a glass of wine in one hand and a piece of cheese in another, and you're, rummaging around for business cards to hand out as if you were dealing cards at a card table. That is not networking. That might be the beginning of a networking relationship, but it is not networking. Networking is building a strong, true connection with another human being. The other thing that shocks people is the best networkers aren't there for themselves. They are there to help other people and form true connections. The most important thing you can do when you are meeting somebody is ask what you can do for them. How can I help you? That is how you begin a connection and strengthen relationships. Being there for other people is the foundation of building a strong network. Next slide, please. Now, some of us don't always have time to network in person. So what I would also emphasize to people is social media networking is a time-saving device for people who are busy with their careers and may not love in-person events. You still need to figure out how to do some in-person networking, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you can develop relationships and keep up those relationships through social media. For example, you find out when people get promoted. You find out when people are in transition. You find out when people have gotten an award, and you can respond to them on social media without leaving your desk and send them a personal note. So it's not usually the initial introduction, it's but that second and third connection that I was talking about, where you are there for the other person, supporting them. One place where people often sort of don't reach out to people is when they see the I'm in transition banner across someone's profile. I got to tell you, that is the most critical time to reach out to someone. People remember those people who were there for them when they needed help the most. I remember when I was at a company, there was a senior woman who was let go. And I reached out to her, it was probably before LinkedIn was big, and I sent her a note just wishing her well and thanking her for her contribution. I later found out I was one of 3 people who reached out to her when she left the company. Let me tell you, she remembers to this day that I was one of those 3 people, and she found another position. So you have to be there for other people. It's the human thing to do. It's the authentic thing to do. So think about how you can connect with others that will remind them that you are there for them. So like I said, on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter are both fabulous places to link in and get to know people in a different way and to support people. So I encourage you to try it out. It's a very safe way for people who think that they're introverts and they don't want to go to cocktail parties to sort of dip their toe in the water. Next slide, please. Allie, next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So, but for most of us, we have to think about networking in both ways, both in social media and in person. And I wanted to spend a little time with those of you who are more senior and you have a network, coming up with what your networking plan is. And a plan, well, I said before, you're there for the other person, you want to also be strategically there for yourself. So what you need to first understand is, what are your career goals? Now, this can vary year to year, day to day. It may be that you're looking for business if you're a partner. It may be that you're trying to amplify your brand by having speaking engagements. It may be that you are looking for a new position or considering a career transition. Determine what you are trying to get for your career to advance forward. Once you determine your career goals, I want you to look at your current network and determine which people in your network could help you move forward. Now, it doesn't have to be the person who can get you what you want. For example, you want speaking engagements, and you don't know where to start in your network, but you know someone who's really connected well with organizations and also just has a broad network. You may want to speak to that person about maybe who in their network they could introduce you to that could further your goal. So you assess your current network, you determine which people might be able to move you forward. Then I want you to look at how strong the relationship is with that person. And the strength of the relationships matters more depending on what the ask is going to be. But if you have a strong relationship with someone, you're okay. If you have a relationship with someone, you may want to think about over the next year or 6 months, how can I strengthen that relationship? So if you are looking to strengthen your relationship with someone who's on a board that you would like to get on, for example, then you may think of, well, I'd like to have lunch with her this week. In the next month. I would like to have a couple of phone calls. I want to reach out and send her some articles on topics that are important to her. By the way, the reach outs always don't have to be professional. If you have a personal connection, you should mention that too. So for example, if you meet a potential client at a cocktail party and you talk about her upcoming vacation to someplace before the virus was happening when we all went on vacation, you might send her a list of restaurants that you've gone to in that area. I heard about a gentleman who was speaking to a person at a cocktail party, potential client. They both had a love of fly fishing, which is big in the United States with some guys. And they were talking about it, and the potential client had a fly fishing trip scheduled for the next week in a small town in Montana. And the attorney in that case actually called up a fly fishing store in that town and found out what fish were running and what type of lures were needed for that. And he sent that to the person's hotel. So it's really just about using what you have, whether it's personal or professional, to start to create a true, authentic connection with somebody. So once you have the plan in place to strengthen or maintain that relationship, you want to look to see if you have gaps. So for example, if you realize that you are practicing law in an area that is dying out for some reason or slowing down, and you want to repurpose yourself in another way, and you want to get to know people in some different industries, or if you're in legal ops and you want to maybe migrate over to a new happening area of ops or pivot to that, but you don't have the connections, you want to come up with a plan for creating those connections. It may be going to a conference. It may be listening to a webinar and then reaching out to the speaker afterwards if they're on this topic. You try to figure out a way that you can address those gaps to move your career the way that you want to. Because networking really is an investment in yourself and your career. And while your managers and your employers should be trying to invest in you, that doesn't always happen. So you need to believe that you are worth that investment. Next slide, please. Okay. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is leveraging the people have asked me, well, if you have a network, how do you do it to move a project or initiative forward? You know, how do you leverage the internal relationships at a company? Again, it always starts with what is your goal. Understanding your goal is critical. And who within your organization is needed for success? What are your counterparts, your peers, whether it's in IT, legal ops, finance? Who is going to be at the table that you may need support from? And what do you need for each of them? And again, assess the connection. And then the most important thing is how they operate, what motivates them, and their influencers. Some people do better if you talk to them one-on-one before a big meeting. Other people are influenced by charts. Some people like storytelling. Understand what those people react to and utilize it. And this may mean going out to your network and seeing what other people have tried with those people that are going to be at the table that has worked. So leverage your relationships, both the relationships with the individuals and with others. Now, I don't know if we might have skipped a slide. Yes, thank you. So we're going to go back to leveraging relationships for results, and this is on career development. So we talked about how to leverage relationships with regard to a project for a company. This is about how to leverage relationships for yourself. You have to understand what you need. So this actually goes before the goals. And the most critical way to do this is getting feedback. You can get it from your manager, but I find the two more effective ways of getting feedback about what you need to move your career forward are a 360-degree feedback interaction, which is when someone who is neutral reaches out to people that you designate and asks them about your strengths and weaknesses. I've done this for mentees. I've done this in my new role as a coach on behalf of companies. People get information they never get during a performance review because now and then your peers and constituents don't want to give you this information because they have fear that it may have an adverse impact on your compensation or your performance rating. If you don't have anyone who can do that, go to your key stakeholders and say, what is said when I am not in the room? Please tell me. People have done this with me. It gives them information so they can really figure out where they need to work on their career. Then I want you to think about not only who in your network can help you move your career forward in this way, but is there someone in your network's network? This rippling effect is often ignored by people, and I can tell you that when I was thinking of doing my career switch, I reached out not only to my network's network, but their network's network. I went down like 4 levels, and some of those people have become my biggest advocates. So getting comfortable with asking your network to utilize their network is critical, and be specific with your asks so they know who in their network they may want to reach to, and also they understand what you're asking of them. Don't just, send something wishy-washy out. Be really specific so they can think about how they or someone else can help you. Okay, Natalie, next couple of slides. Okay, so now we're going to move over to some of the relationships that are critical for you to have. A mentor. Often one of the largest mistakes that I have heard from very senior attorneys is that they are too senior to have a mentor, that they're already there. They know everything they need to know. This is never the case. When I was an SVP, I had mentors. I had people who I could go to, who I trusted, who moved my career forward by giving me sound advice. So even, and the other thing I'm going to throw out there is now and then you might want to reverse mentor, someone who is more junior to you, who can tell you about the landscape, help you with your management skills, which I found incredibly important, talking to more junior people about what mattered to them and how my communication style may or may not inspire them, which was important to me. So having a good, strong mentoring relationship can happen at any time in your career. Next slide. There's a couple of different types of mentoring that I think you should be aware of, internal versus external. If possible, we're going to talk about this with the sponsor too, you want at least one of both. You get different perspectives and different views that allow you to make the best decisions for your career. Then there's also what I call spot versus long-term mentoring. Again, spot might be, I've changed industries, I've changed law firms, and I need to understand how the operations role in this company works. So it may be just, I need a few coffees with some people just for them to explain to me how finance works here, how this works. Or I in-house, and I went from insurance to making gadgets, and I need to understand the culture of that company, or I want a deep understanding about how the product cycle works. It's a really specific ask. It helps you move your career forward, but it's a spot mentoring. It's not going to be a long-term mentoring relationship. It has a very discrete result that you are looking for. A long-term mentor, on the other hand, is probably someone you're working with maybe a communications or management style, inspiring people, more of a long-term career role, and that's a bigger commitment. And this goes back to the asks. If you're very specific when reaching out to your network for what you need from them, it allows them to gauge. I may not have time to have another long-term mentor. When I was in-house, I probably had 12 at a time. So getting to, someone lucky number 13 might have been what threw me over the edge. But if someone said to me, I just need to have 2 or 3 coffees with you to go through this one issue, that would have been okay. Then that's not as long-term a commitment. I can do that. So think about really specifically what you're asking of your network when you do it. Next slide, please. And I want to go through some basic things about mentoring because, as I said, I've been up to 12 mentees a year, so I learned a little bit. The mentee needs to own the relationship. You need to design the relationship. And by this, I mean you talk about things like confidentiality. What is the space like? How brutally honest you want the person to be? What you're looking for. Then you need to be fully present when you're there and prepared. And the other thing is be open to what's going to come out of this relationship, to be challenged, to change, to listen to new perspectives. If you go into any relationship, mentoring or sponsorship, and you're not open to these things, nothing is going to change. What is it, Einstein? People expect to do the same thing and have a different result. That's the definition of insanity. So you have to think about, am I willing to actually move the dial and get outside my comfort zone? And remember, it's a two-way relationship. Your mentor may want, advice from you and be open to giving it and supporting that person. Next slide, please. Okay. Sponsorship is like you've won the lottery. Let me talk about sponsorship. It's different than a mentor because here the person speaks for you and looks for opportunities to move your career forward. And I always talk about the big S and the little s. So the big S in sponsorship is you get someone who actually puts you in for a job or a career opportunity and calls you. Some of the little s's are the things that might lead you to that place. They speak for you when it's time to get rated. They look for opportunities for you to work in other areas, cross assignments that might move your career forward. They look for speaking opportunities for you. So they can be both internal or external. But they are people who believe in you so much that they are almost as invested in your career as you are. And it is critical that you appreciate these relationships. And by the way, these are really rare. They are earned. Next slide. So as you know, we went through, there's all these opportunities that come out of having a sponsor, promotions, network, because they will introduce you to people. So when you are thinking about career changes, they will say, well, my friend down the block who's SVP or Executive Vice President at this company, I'm sure he would talk to you or she would talk to you. They will tell you the unvarnished truth about your career, which is incredibly important. And they will give you potential access to key stakeholders, not only externally, but internally. And this may come in a lot of different ways. Opportunities to present at leadership meetings, to leadership groups, opportunities to speak at events or to lead projects. Again, these people want you to succeed almost as much as you do. Next slide, please. This is just a list of the types of qualities that sponsors look for. They are really looking for the golden child. And this is what is critical about that. Because they are using their own political capital to further your career, they are only going to do that for someone who has gone beyond. And that is why it is rare, because there has to be a connection with this person and they have to believe in you. Now, one of the problems that has happened with sponsorship is people tend to sponsor people like themselves. So that men tend to sponsor men. So white people tend to sponsor other white people. So you don't get, it's harder for women and people of color to have access to these relationships. And so you have to think, and the rates of success for women and people of color who get these relationships is dramatically higher than those that don't. So you have to try to also think about who has power within your organization as you're thinking about potential sponsors and potential mentors, because mentors can turn into sponsors. Now, the difference is mentors are there to give you advice. They're not necessarily, I mean, I can mentor anybody. I'm not going to put everyone up for a promotion or for an opportunity. And so the idea is, how do you build those relationships? If you're in an organization where the powerful relationships are white men and you're only networking with women, you have to change that dynamic. And we can talk about some of the ways that you can do it, but it is about forging relationships and be getting outside your comfort zone and maybe asking for a cup of coffee with someone. You know, can I have 10 minutes to understand your career, a half hour? Maybe you're not asking for a lot of time, but you need to sort of think about how you forge these relationships, because they are so critical for success and can make a huge difference in your career going forward. Next slide. And the one thing I did also want to mention with that, well, you can ask anyone to mentor you. You really can't ask anyone to be your sponsor, because unless it's in their heart, they're not going to use political capital. And even if they do, you better deliver. And I'm going to say this to someone honestly. There was a woman who I sponsored at one point who came to me, and I used some political capital to get her into, she wanted to go from the legal profession to the business side. And I used political capital to move her over to a business program, which would lead to a management position in the business side. She did not do well in the program. She did not bring her best self to that program. I was honest with her about it, but I would think twice about whether I would have sponsored her for something else. So if you don't feel you have someone who is speaking for you and trying to give you opportunities, you need to understand why. Because while there is unconscious bias in sponsorship, sometimes there are other factors in play, and you need to understand and eliminate those. So you want to solicit feedback again. Feedback, and it's hard, but it's a gift. Be open to the feedback and address it, because again, if you get the feedback and you don't act on it, nothing is going to change. And by the way, one of the biggest factors for me sponsoring people was when they did react to feedback. I sponsored people who had bad years, bad performances. But if they came in and they took what was said to heart and they learned from it, that to me was like a big wow, because people who are willing to learn and be agile in learning are the type of people that I want, because I know that they can go further because they are invested in themselves and their careers. Next slide. So increasing the odds of obtaining a sponsor. Leverage your mentor. It's the relationships that will get you to the next level. It's really important. Increase your visibility. And again, some of these are interrelated, but what are you known for? Are you on those projects? Are you willing to take on that project that no one else wants and make it a home run? The more that people know about you, the more that you will elevate your visibility and the chances that somebody will sponsor you. And we talked about this. Identify and cultivate potential sponsors. Who are the king or queen makers in your company? Who are the key people who decide on promotion? I was working with a woman who is at a law firm, non-equity partner, and she just moved to that law firm and she was up for equity. Big deal, right? And so I said to her, well, who are the key stakeholders who are going to decide whether you make that partnership? And she said, oh, there's this guy, Y, down the hall. And she goes, well, it's really not down the hall. He sits next to me. And I said, oh, that's fabulous. You are going to have, you have a great relationship with this person. She goes, no, I've never spoke to him. Understand who makes a difference in your career and develop a relationship with that person. Learn to toot your own horn, not in an offensive way, but sort of let people know what you're doing in a very authentic, natural way. If this is hard for you, find a brag sharer, as I call them, a buddy, a brag buddy, a person who will speak on your behalf. I do this all the time for women when I'm with them at cocktail parties who I know are absolutely wonderful that have trouble sharing their brand and their accomplishments. I will talk about them. And if we do this for each other, we will amplify all of us up, and we need to do this. So think about whether or not, if you're uncomfortable while you're working on getting that skill, because I would say you need it because your brag buddy may decide to go someplace else, see if you can have a brag buddy where you can both support each other. And the other thing is you want to be seen in action. And this was a mistake I made early in my career, and I'm going to be honest about it. And actually, my sponsor told me I made a huge mistake and never to do it again. I was put in charge of a large cross-functional project. I was in charge of maneuvering everything, getting all the pieces in place. And then when we had a big event, a big forum on this issue that was impacting the company in a serious way, I gave all the speaking parts to other people. I did not at all speak at the conference. And she's like, you did all the work. You need to get up on stage and take the credit. I was like, no, I want to be a team player. Everyone was, we all were a group. And she was like, no, you have to take credit and be seen for what you've done. And I think this is a problem that a lot of us do. We always want to be the team player and give credit, but we often forget how critical we are to the success of projects. Next page. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Personal board of directors, I want to go through this quickly because I'm really realized I spent too much time on some of the other things. These are your buddies, but are your buddies who will tell you the brutal, undying truth. You need to have this group of people you can go to when you have a big career advice. Who are the people in your network who will tell you the unvarnished truth and help move your career forward? Next slide. We're going to go one more slide. Thank you, Natalie. So people that you want on your personal board of directors, people in your field, and actually also people outside your field, someone who's been there, been through similar situations that you are, someone who will lift you up when you're not feeling it, someone who's going to tell you like it is, like you're out of your mind. Or, as one of my friends said to another friend of ours, it's time for you to leave that company. You're going nowhere and you're probably going to get fired soon. Have those people who will tell you the things that you need to hear so that you can really think about your career in an honest way. A great connector is someone, if you're in that transition spot, who's going to bring you, give you 20 names of people you should speak to. But make sure, and next slide, Natalie, while you're doing this, that you don't have an echo chamber. You need to have people with different points of view. So please do this. It's really important to have this. And then I'm going to leave just the slides on coaching. We're going to distribute the slides later. A coach is a great way of moving yourself outside your comfort zone. Talk to your network about the coach. Most coaches give free initial sessions so you can see if you're a mesh. Make sure there's a connection if you're going to do it. Not everyone meshes with everyone else. Next slide. Next slide now, we're going to go to the scenarios. So I wanted to go over some real life scenarios in some of this time to sort of take some of the concepts that we've talked about and apply them to real life. So in scenario one, you're a new experienced leader who's moved into a company and you're having a hard time getting change to happen. There's not enough buy-in. People are skeptical. This happens to all of us. And one of the things that you really need to think about when you're in this situation is, do I know my stakeholders? Do I understand my stakeholders? How do I relate to my stakeholders? So the first thing you should do is what I call a listening tour. And the pre-step to the listening tour is to find out everything about those people you're going to be listening to. Research them online. If people in your network know the individuals, understand where they may be coming from before you even get there, so you can prepare. So leverage your network to help you expand your network with these new folks. When you are on the listening tour, again, the focus isn't on you. The focus is on them. What are their needs? What are they hoping for? What has been their past experience in this area? What could we do better? What should stay the same? What should we stop doing? So the idea is leveraging the thoughts and ideas from them, because the more that you understand and connect to them, the more you can hone your communications to them in the future. And it's more likely that you will be successful. Another thing to think about as you're on this listening tour, and this is actually using more your network than in the tour itself, is who are the people who influence that individual? And should you be leveraging them? So, for example, I had the same secretary all the time I was at MetLife. God bless her soul. I love her. She probably would not make me do something or like somebody, but if someone was disrespectful to her or had a bad relationship with her, it would have been a factor. And she told me her opinion on everything. And so what I'm saying is you need to understand who are the people that may influence a leader. Is it their chief of staff? Is it their assistant? Is it a peer who they grew up with in the organization? Understand those relationships so that you can leverage those relationships. The other thing I would say is it's relationship building when you're in this situation. You may have to go back 9 different times. It's the beginning and it's not built overnight. So go back and have those discussions. And when something doesn't go wrong or the way you liked, have that honest discussion. I think people respect that. So think about it when you're in this situation, what you can do to leverage the information you have and the information you can gain from that individual to move the project forward and understand the dynamics and even come up with a plan. The plan may be, I now understand that Natalie likes to have information ahead of time. So I'm going to make sure she has that information ahead of time. Joe likes numbers, so I'm going to get him all the numbers ahead of time. Understand how they like to react and react that way. Okay, next slide. So scenario 2 is a little bit different. Scenario 2 is you're extremely busy, you have a strong internal network, you have a robust network of people from university and some other moms, and you're not sure if you really should be expanding your network. I'm going to start with something generally speaking. One, life happens. Life happens, especially in companies and law firms where people are looking for new positions. Make sure your external network is extremely strong. I've had 2 conversations this week with women who are in bad situations because they did not keep up with their external network, and they're in a career transition situation. You want to have a strong external network that can help you. And if your network of friends from university or other moms of those people, then you're fine. But be aware of that, because I knew a friend of mine who had a very strong internal network. She lost her job at the company. A year and a half later, she got her job back at the company because it was more of a mass layoff. And 2 weeks later, I saw her at her first networking event that I'd ever seen her. And I asked her about it. She goes, my network was entirely this company, and I could not get another job. So that's my tale of caution. Make sure you have a strong external network. Also make sure that your network is in alignment with your career goals and where you are today. So if you've gone up the ladder or you are switching areas, assess your network to make sure that where you want to go, your network can help you. If it can't, then you need to think about how to expand your network. On the other hand, if it does, then you want to think about your networking plan as how to strengthen and maintain those relationships. One other thing I just want to mention with regard to looking for a position outside the company, what people don't appreciate is most of those opportunities come from people who are not your strongest advocates. They are people in your network, but they may not be your best friends. So men have very broad but shallow networks, and by shallow, I mean the relationships don't have deep connections. Women have more narrow networks, but deeper connections. So when it comes to opportunities, men are at an advantage often because they have a broader network. And not only that, within their network, most of their network teams are mostly other men who also have these broad networks. So what you get is that ripple effect that they have a much broader team that they can access when they are in transition. So think about that when you're moving forward. Is your network broad enough? You don't have to be best friends with everyone in your network, but you do need to have a broad enough network that is a safety net for you if you're ever in this situation. So my answer to scenario 2 is make sure you have a strong enough external network if you're in a situation where you may lose your position, and sometimes there's those surprises, and it takes a while to build them, so keep that in mind. 2, look at your career goals, and if your career goals line up with your current network, your plan is to focus on your current network. But the other thing I would say, keeping in mind for your networking goals, is assess what is going on in the lives of people in your network. So if you're an attorney with a good book of business, but 3 of your clients are approaching retirement age, it may be time to start expanding your network and strengthening some other relationships. Next scenario. This is one that is very common. You like your job, it's okay. But you see other people going on to do some exciting things, and you're wondering how they made those transitions. And how do you go about doing it? Okay, I have a couple of pieces of advice here. First, always go look at your network that you're comfortable with first. So go to those people before you go to a conference. Reach out to them, do a virtual cup of coffee, virtual glass of wine, whatever, virtual glass of water, if that's your thing, and talk to them. If your network can't help you, but you know someone in someone else's network that can, ask for a warm introduction. And by this, I mean someone who will introduce you to the other person so that you can have that conversation. You will get better information from a warm introduction than you will by going to a conference. Third, I would go to the conference if that was the next alternative, but focus again on the other person. Ask them a lot of questions about their journey, why they did it, what it was like. People like talking about themselves, so if you do it in that way, you'll get some good information. Finally, I would also suggest that you join social media, especially Twitter, where there are people in that area. And you can build relationships on Twitter. I have gotten some of my biggest advocates from my Twitter relationships, and it's very exciting when you get to meet them in person finally. So think about social media as another way of getting information. So I wanted to leave some time for some questions. Are there any questions from the group?
Hey, Sheila, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about how to frame communicating value when you're tooting your own horn, so women don't feel like they're bragging or they're being egotistical?
Well, okay, first thing I'm going to tell people, if you think you're egotistical, you're probably not that egotistical unless someone has told you that. We put so much on ourselves in terms of, feeling that we're inauthentic and we're bragging. I think one of the best ways to do it is if you have a story. If you can tell me a story about something that you were working on, that to me gives me so much information. It lets me know about how you think, what you do. It relays passion. So if you have the nice opening, I would do that. The other thing that I suggest in terms of networking to sort of start the conversation, don't come in with a long elevator speech. Come in with some bullet points of things that you would like to relay to people as your brand. And do it in such a way that you get them engaged in conversation. For example, I know a woman who's a tax litigator. And I have to say, she hit me as a typical tax person. Maybe not, I hope there's no tax people that are offended, but there's a certain, bias that they're a little shyer. And she was that way. I found out later that she used to be a private eye and used to go like undercover, on little missions. And so what we talked about was leading with that she's a tax litigator, and what she really relies on is a lot of the skills she built as a private eye. Very simple statement, not really bragging, but then all of a sudden people are engaged in the conversation with her. So they start asking her, what was it like to be a private eye? It doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with her legal. People are going to remember her, and they're going to think about how she reacts. Another woman I know married a cowboy. And so, yes, and she's a lawyer in big law. She went out to a dude ranch, met a man, and they got married. And so she does deals, and she goes, I am so used to wrangling cowboys in on deals that I married one. And people are like, what? Because it's not that most people in New York City are not married to cowboys. I know you may be shocked by that, but it gave her something that was a hook. Another person talked about an insurance issue with the NRA that she worked on. The idea is by having a story, all of a sudden people get hooked in. Other people who are in real estate that I know point to buildings that they were involved in, or that they, might have done in terms of that. And it just starts to open up the conversation, and that's what you really want. The idea is not for you to spew out 20 minutes of your brand. The idea is for you to have a communication with that person, which is back and forth, where they're interested in them, but also don't forget to ask them questions, like what has been your experience in that? I think that is also very helpful. And some people who are introverts fear doing this type of thing. And the most interesting thing that I've become aware of through a friend who did some research on this is sometimes introverts are the best networkers because they're very strategic in their thinking and what they're trying to accomplish. So they think about ahead of time, who are the people that they want to approach and what are they going to say? So they have simplified their branding message or their story into something that they're comfortable with because they know it's going to be an issue, whereas opposed to people who are very extroverted, just come in and sort of overtake the conversation, so that you can do this in a very thoughtful way. But the most important advice I can give you is after you've had this conversation with someone is the follow-up. 90% of people don't follow up afterwards. And if you don't follow up, you're not going to build that relationship. Remember, at a networking event, that's just the start of building a true connection. It's not the end game. Covered probably way too much in that answer.
Sheila, can you also talk about how to leverage LinkedIn for follow-up? I know that you're a huge fan of using LinkedIn, and so to keeping your new connections warm.
Okay, so one thing is, I'd say within 48 hours, you should try to send a LinkedIn note to the person. Don't just send a connection. Make a personal note. Write a personal note to the person referring to something that you all talked about and what was meaningful. If during that conversation you promised some information for the person, which is also another good technique for the follow-up, that if in some way you can say, oh, I was there, or, oh, my firm wrote an article on this, or I just read an article on this new ops thing coming out. I think this is just on point. It gives you a natural way to follow up. So if you said that you were going to do something for somebody, do it. So reach out, personalize the note, give them some information if you promised it at that time, or say, I'm looking for that article, I'm going to get that to you, or that invite. And then afterwards, keep either in your if you have a client relationship manager, or if you have something else, a spreadsheet, notes about what is important to that individual, if that person is important to you, so that if something does cross your desk, you can follow up with them with a personal note. But again, look at what's important to them. Look at your LinkedIn feed. Are they interested in women in politics and voting? Don't want to go totally into women in politics right now in the States, but is this an issue that's important to them that, oh, maybe this would be of note to them? You want to think about how you can connect with that other individual and keep it up. And then now and then reach out. So a lot of us are busy. I am a big fan of virtual, like I said before, cups of coffee and wine. Let's just get a 15-minute conversation. The other thing is, if you went to an industry conference and there were 2 or 3 women who were sort of like-minded or interested in a project, have a group phone call. And by the way, that helps save you time. So you're only doing 1 phone call rather than 5, and maybe it's on a certain issue, or you get a guest speaker if it's a Zoom phone call, if you're not all in the same location. I also recommend this with clients too. If you're a lawyer, you may want to find senior women who are potential clients, or people in a certain industry, and get them together. If time is an issue for you in networking, look for events that you can leverage one single piece of time to hit more than one person and give that person value, because you have like-minded people on the phone call, or people who are interested in the same issue. Those are the things that matter to people, is how you can add value.
Thank you very much for that, Sheila, and that was very, very insightful. I would just make a quick couple of observations on some of the things that resonated the most with me before we close today's session. You spoke about so many interesting issues there, and you touched upon some of the things like, one of the things that you mentioned very early on, which was about when you build your network, and whether it's at an event or otherwise, it's the question that you should be asking is, how can you help them, and how can you reach out to them to help out? That resonated so much with me, because in my personal experience, in my career, in my networking life, and also having set up She Breaks the Law in particular, and the networking experience since then, that has been the most important for me. And I've come across so many women who ask me that question as well. So it's not just me saying, or trying to identify right from the first meeting through to any follow-ups, how can we really support each other, collaborate, or do something together? Or what is it? How can I help this woman, or vice versa? I mean, I recently, just this week, had a couple of lunches and meetings with fantastic women that it was just a follow-up, but actually they were so, authentic and upfront, and really made notes in terms of how they can help or who they can connect to. And I often come back from every networking, opportunity that I have, whether it's a coffee or really simple chat coming back with lots of follow-ups to do to make sure that people get the value out of that. So it resonated a lot with me. You spoke about mentoring and sponsoring and coaching and all of those relationships. And again, I can relate to that very much. In the course of my career, I've had mentors both within and outside the organization. Or I love the concept of the personal board of directors that you describe. And at the moment, I'm really lucky that I have my She Breaks the Law, board members and my advisory board that's really my personal board. But also I've had such strong mentors within HSF and otherwise as well that I really rely on them on a constant basis, and they are both within my personal and professional networks. So I think that was very, very great to learn about how actually these roles of sometimes a mentor can become a sponsor and vice versa, or how to build your identify and build your personal board of directors to have that sort of echo chamber. I really love that analogy you gave. And finally, I would just stress on the conversation that we had in terms of social media and how to build strong networks and what to make of that. Obviously, She Breaks the Law exists on LinkedIn, and that's how we start. And of course, we have fantastic launch events and fantastic other networking events where women are, able to meet each other and make those stronger bonds to create those networks within their personal. But equally, we see that on our LinkedIn group, there are strong relationships being built out, and a lot of what you discussed just right now, for example, a number of our focus groups, that's exactly how it's set up. In fact, going back to our very beginning, this network wouldn't have come into existence if it wasn't for me, Nikki, and Christy meeting at the back of an event and a dinner and following up with the passion. And, we started off with that group call that you said, and then we had the LinkedIn group for ourselves. And the next thing you know, a year on, we are 2,000 women. So I would absolutely, Twitter, social media, LinkedIn, there's a lot to be said for that as well. And it really makes, especially in this global and sort of, the times in which we live with coronavirus and God knows what have you, all sorts of limitations in terms of face-to-face meeting, but actually we should be treating and embracing LinkedIn and Twitter much more, freely. And those are fantastic sort of ways to do it. And now all of our focus groups, including on founders, how to sort of increase funding for female founders through to our continuous learning and other groups really benefit from this sort of virtual collaboration. So thank you very much. Conscious of the time, we've gone over by just a minute. So in case, Natalie, how do you want to sort of close this? Or
Yes, so thank you, Priya. So just in closing, thank you so much for joining. We would love your feedback because this is the first launch initiative for She Develops in partnership with She Breaks the Law and Transforming Women's Leadership. So if you could please go to pollev.com/Natalie Runyo 195 and answer. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. In addition, we have recorded this session, so for those of you who did not attend, or for those of you who want to give it another listen, you should find that in your inbox tomorrow. So look for our next webinar, which will be on April 2nd, same time on the East Coast and in London. And thank you again for attending, and thank you, Sheila. Virtual applause for you. Great session, and thank you for sharing your expertise. And we look forward to having you back on April 2nd. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and week. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.